With the NHL season less than a week away, for a lot of teams, hope springs eternal. On today's edition of Locked On NHL, what could go wrong for the 10 best Stanley Cup contenders?
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's edition of Locked On NHL. I am Nick Sararis, the host of Locked On Oilers. That is my good friend and the co-host of Locked On Penguins, Hunter Hodes. And we want to thank everyone that is making Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your teams covered every day. And today's edition of Locked On NHL is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Download the FanDuel app now by visiting FanDuel.com and win $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Hunter, my friend, we are less than a week away from the start of the NHL regular season. And this time of year, everybody feels like they got a chance. Even the Blackhawks, even the Sharks, they're going to break training camp, and the guys on those teams are going to give their God's honest best effort to try and make the playoffs, win the whole thing. But today's show, we're going to focus in on the teams with the 10 best odds via FanDuel, our presenting sponsor, by the way, FanDuel, to win the Stanley Cup. We are going to go in reverse order. And real quick, as a point of order before we start, and we will get through all 10, remember that gambling markets are constructed in a way to try and entice people to bet on these teams evenly. They are not the most accurate reflection of what is going to happen. They are designed to make it so that somebody would see value in picking a team at 20-1. And real quick, point of order, the longest shot of any team in the last 10 years to win the Stanley Cup, your Florida Panthers, 20-1, and then the St. Louis Blues checked in at 30-1 when they won the Stanley Cup a number of years ago. So, generally speaking, we are looking at teams that win the whole thing somewhere between 7.5, so plus 750, and 11-1 plus 1100. Those are generally where we find the team that wins the whole thing. So, to start out, we have the Winnipeg Jets with the 10th best odds, tied for the 10th best odds with the Toronto Maple Leafs 17-1. For Winnipeg, it's real simple. Who's scoring the goals? Who's scoring the goals? That has been their issue for a few years now. They get to the playoffs, no problem. Their defense, their goaltending is more than good enough for the regular season. But in the postseason, they need to score. And no Nick Ehlers now. You're going to be asking a lot of Cole Perfetti, of Gabe Vilardi, of those depth guys to take leaps. Or maybe it's a young guy, somebody we're not banking on. Maybe it's a Brad Lambert type guy who makes a leap for them. But the Jets need more offense.
That's true. I also think, Nick, can they win on the road? They've been brutal on the road in the playoffs these last couple of years, especially this year, where it feels like they're a completely different team away from home. And then, of course, can Connor Hellebuyck show up? Yeah, he played fine in the Four Nations. He's obviously great during the regular season. I got to see it from him in the playoffs. That's still the big thing for me. So I'll add those to the offense. And then next up with the Maple Leafs, Nick, for me, how are you replacing Mitch Marner's production? That's 100 plus points, man. That's going to be really hard. And also for the rebuttal, can you go deep? Seriously, we can make jokes about this for 30
eternity, and we will.
But you need to show me that you can go deep in the playoffs beyond just one round.
Yeah. What I will add in addition to Toronto, I assume, Hunter, and I know for a fact you're very familiar with the stylings of Moneyball. You're very familiar with the premise of Moneyball. You don't replace Jason Giambi. You don't replace Mitch Marner. There is not a player in the world capable of replacing that level of production one for one. The Leafs have tried to recreate it in the aggregate with 4 30-point guys. The Leafs might be a little bit more well-rounded top to bottom, but their bottom six is still a massive question mark as far as offensive production. Their defense is all another year older. I liked what they got out of Chris Tanev last year, but he's also going to be 37 by the midway point of this year. And the undercurrent of all of this is, do we all believe Joe Wall and Anthony Stolarz are this good? Or is this purely the benefit of being a decent tandem where neither guy is bad? I'm not saying I wouldn't take either guy, but they're both in a tandem. Neither guy is going to take a crazy majority of the starts, and they're relying on the results in front of them. They are environmental goalies. And we've seen the Leafs do this for a while now, where they try and recreate goaltending in the aggregate, where the individual talent is not great, but it is enough to keep them competitive with the team that's in front of them. And I said this yesterday on the episode I recorded about the Oilers trading for Connor Ingram. You don't necessarily need your goalie to steal you games to win the whole thing. You do need your goalie to tread water. The better your goalie is, the longer they're able to tread water. And when you get into a second or a third round, I'm not saying Anthony Stolarz or Joseph Woll needs to steal you a game against the Panthers, the Lightning, but he needs to stay in the game long enough to keep you in there against a Vasilevsky, a Bobrovsky, a Shesterkin, a Swayman, etc. That's the key here if you're the Leafs.
I've said for a long time, if you want to win a Stanley Cup, you need average goaltending. And that's the bare minimum. Obviously, anything above
Aiden Hill's
that,
the cutoff. Aiden Hill is the lowest caliber goalie you can win the whole thing with.
That's totally fair. Like, you just need legit average league goaltending. If you have a stacked roster, top to bottom, you can run 4 lines, 3 pairings, good special teams units. If you just get the average goaltending, I think you should be fine. Next up, Nick, number 8, we got the Devils at plus 1,400. I think for me with the Devils, one of the things is health. Like, can they stay healthy? If they're not healthy, they're not going to go very far in the playoffs. Like, maybe they can win a round or something like that. But if they're not all healthy, they're not going to go very far. And also, coaching. I'm not the biggest fan of Sheldon Keefe, to be honest. I think he's fine. I'm not sure how much he totally upgrades that team behind the bench, but I still got to see it a little bit more from him. And also, I got to see a little bit more from Jacob Markstrom in net. He's been fine for them, but I still need to see a little bit.
He was injured
more
last year. He didn't have a great first year in New Jersey. He wasn't bad, but he didn't really elevate. And granted, when you've played 7 different goalies the year before, league average goaltending sounds great if you're a Devils fan.
Yeah. No, I agree with you. I just think he can be a little bit better, in my opinion. But that health, and then again, I'm just not the biggest believer in Sheldon Keefe. So those are the things that, if we're playing devil's advocate, that's what I would say about the Devils.
So I will agree with those 3 points and then add on one more addition. Can we see their style translate in the postseason? The 2 times they have come up against the Hurricanes in the playoffs, they have gotten absolutely smoked. And it's largely a style issue because Carolina is so willing to play dump and chase over and over and over again, whereas the Devils want to turn every game into an up and down, back and forth, a little bit less under Sheldon Keefe than under Lindy Ruff, but that's still their bread and butter. They want to live in transition. They want to create cross-seam passes. They want to use their foot speed. Can that style of play translate to the postseason? We've seen them try to get a little more rugged. Andre Palat, even though he's definitely towards the end of his career, trading for Paul Cotter last year from Vegas, who had a nice start but faded as the year went along. They just need a little more diversity in their style throughout their lineup. I think the Devils are absolutely capable of making a leap into a conference final, but I want to see how their guys adapt their games to playoff hockey. And I make no bones about it. The Rangers were the perfect matchup for them in the first round 2 years ago because the Devils are so much faster. Against a slow team like the Rangers, the Devils can get away with not really having much of a cycle game. That's the dirty little secret of that series and why it worked out so well for them against the Rangers. The Rangers are unbelievably a slow hockey team, and the Devils were skating circles around them how much faster they were. So speed has a ton of value. But you can mitigate that if you have a strong forecheck, if you dump and chase the way Carolina and Florida, who run the 2 best forechecks in the entire NHL, do. We are going to take our first break on today's edition of Locked On NHL. When we come back, we're going to visit some familiar faces. All 3 of the teams in our next segment have won the Stanley Cup in recent history. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer you don't want to miss because right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5 and get $300 in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you'll unlock $300 in bonus bets to use on the FanDuel app. I love FanDuel because it makes however you want to play happen. If you don't want to pick the game and you just want to pick player props, FanDuel's got you. If you want to put together a same-game parlay with your friends for a squad ride and sweat it out together, FanDuel's got you. Or if you're watching the game and you feel the tide turning underfoot, live betting, FanDuel's got you. Tonight, pretty good game. I know Mac Jones is probably going to play for Brock Purdy tonight, kind of take some of the luster out of it, but 49ers-Rams is a pretty good game on paper. Sunday afternoon, Tampa Bay Bucks Baker Mayfield, my guy, your favorite quarterback's favorite quarterback, going up to Seattle to take on Sam Darnold and the Seahawks, where the Seahawks are 3-point favorites. And then sneaky good game on Monday Night Football. The Chiefs going to Jacksonville, where the Chiefs are 3-point road favorites. Literally leads me to one question. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com, download the FanDuel app today, and get started for your chance at $300 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we are playing devil's advocate. And I know for some of our audience, it's been a while since you've been in a college lecture with somebody playing devil's advocate. But for the purposes of this conversation, it is a good framing device because it lends itself to my point and something I talked about really extensively on an Oilers episode I recorded for next week. The more questions there are about your team, the less likely you are to win the whole thing. The fewer uncertainties you have, the more likely you are things to go your way. Speaking of certainties, the Tampa Bay Lightning making the playoffs have basically been a certainty for my entire adult life. Since 2015, I know they had the 1 year in there where they missed the playoffs entirely, but this has been a really good franchise for a while now. Jake Gensel fit really well for them last year in the Stamkos spot. Brandon Hagel was an 80-point player for them last year. It's a simple question. Do they still have the juice to go on a long run? Or are they too old? Are they too worn out? I reason to believe, and we said this a few weeks ago, if they can get an easier first-round matchup than the Panthers, I certainly think they could beat a Toronto. I think they could beat an Ottawa. I think them versus Montreal would be a very fun first-round series, the new school versus the old school. But Tampa Bay's just old. That's my question for them. Are they too old to break through?
Also, I think they're still top heavy. Like I like
their bottom six is bad. Their bottom six is bad.
I like the Bjorkstrand move. I like getting back Yanni Gourde. I still think they're a little too top heavy. Like it's not like where it was, Nick, when they were winning those Stanley Cups and they had the deepest roster in the league. Like I just think they're a little too top heavy right now. The age, that has something to do with it. They've played a ton of hockey these last few years as well, so that has something to do with it as well. But I will say, Nick, they should be a lock, in my opinion, to get a top 3 spot in the Atlantic this year, especially without Sasha Barkov for the entire regular season. More on that a little bit later on in the show. If they were to play the Panthers right now in the playoffs, I know we took the Lightning this past year, and that was pretty bad. I'd like to think the Lightning would be the favorite, but it's – I don't even want to. It's October 2nd, so I'm not going to make that pick.
We got time.
Hey, I think the Lightning, as it stands right now, they have the ability to go deep, but it's just a matter of can they get a little bit better in their bottom 6, and can all that hockey that they've played, not catch up with them for this year, because it's been a lot these last several years in Tampa. And I think Vasilevsky's going to be great too, but those are a couple of questions that I have.
Oh, for sure. The depth is a major concern. It's probably been the short point for them against Florida. And granted, Florida's got an all-time great salary cap era roster assembled. Again, I'll cite the stat: the Marchand, Luosterainen, Lundell line outscored opponents like 15-3 in the playoffs last year, and that was the Florida third line where Marchand, Lundell, and Luosterainen were basically only playing on penalty kill and at 5-on-5. I'll be curious to see if Lundell takes the jump if they throw him into that Barkov role and they see what he can do, but we'll get to Florida soon enough. Next up on the list, another team that has won a Stanley Cup in recent history, the Colorado Avalanche, who are coming in at 10-1 at plus 1,000. Colorado's depth worries me. And then the other end of the spectrum, are we sure Mackenzie Blackwood's good? He very much could turn right back into a pumpkin, and you're stuck with another one of those 5 by 5.5, 5-year by $6 million goalie contracts that stink. You end up with Chris Drieger, you end up with Philip Grubauer, you end up with the Darcy Kemper version that the Capitals got. I'm not saying I think Blackwood is bad, but I'm saying last year was the first good hockey he played since 2021, and it was on a really good team with circumstances that were momentum was behind him. The tide was turning for him. I'm not saying I think he's going to be bad, but there's absolutely a possibility Blackwood stinks again.
Nick, it's also almost the Tristan Jarry contract right there. That's right, 5 times 5.375. So pretty similar. And you don't want him turning into Tristan Jarry this year. That's for sure, considering how inconsistent he has been. But yeah, the goaltending still scares me. I thought Blackwood was fine last year, but I'm just not sure he's going to repeat that. I love Colorado's top 6. Like they're absolutely loaded up there. I like getting Brock Nelson for the next several years, even though he's a bit older now. That's still a nice second line center to have. Having Landeskog back for a full year is going to be
We'll see
great.
what he is. I'm curious to see what he is in a full season. He looked good in the playoffs.
I agree. I thought he looked really good. I'm excited to see what he can do. But, your depth in the bottom six, you got Victor Olofsson down there, Ross Colton, Jack Drury, Parker Kelly, Yoel Kiviranta. I got to see a bit more. Like, I need the Avalanche to be a bit more aggressive right around the trade deadline to really bolster this lineup heading into the playoffs, because if your top six is getting shut down, I'm not sure who is scoring the goals in the bottom six here. You obviously have a great top pair in Devon Toews and Cale Makar. I'd like to see maybe another move on the back end. I like getting Burns on the bottom pairing, but I still want to maybe see another move there. But again, it's goaltending for me, and kind of like Tampa, the lack of depth in the bottom six. Obviously not like Tampa with goaltending, because Vasilevsky is a top 5 goalie, but like Tampa, I just got to see it depth-wise. And then to wrap up this segment, Nick, number 5 with the 5th best odds, the Vegas Golden Knights at plus 950. I think with Vegas, it's also kind of like New Jersey, Nick, health. They got to be healthy. They're already going to be without Pietrangelo for this entire year, and it's probably not going to play ever again if we're being honest.
They'll trade for Rasmus Anderson. It's fine.
Yeah, I mean, he only probably wants to go there, but he's probably not going to play ever again, Pietrangelo, that is. This roster is loaded top to bottom. You knew they were going to take that playoff loss to the Oilers very personally. You could tell that front office and that owner were really pissed off after getting destroyed by the Oilers like that. And what did they do, Nick? They go out and sign a 100-point player, and then make a couple other moves, and they're right back in it. So this team, when healthy, is a juggernaut. But again, the biggest concern for me, can these guys stay healthy come playoff time? That's really it for me, to be honest.
So the Golden Knights got through a first-round series that was 6 games, and then they lost in 5 to the Oilers.
Yeah.
So in 11 playoff games, they scored 28 goals last year. It's not great. And look, this is one of the byproducts of playing Bruce Cassidy hockey. You don't score a lot. You are an elite defensive team. I think there's a strong argument to be made. Bruce Cassidy might be the best defensive coach in the NHL. The results he's been able to coax out of both elite players and less elite players really speaks to a philosophy of defensive priority. I think the fact that other than Jack Eichel, nobody on that team was over a point per game last year illustrates how defense conscious and how much they struggled to score offensively. I think, and I said this when we had talked about it back earlier in the summer when Marner first signed there, I wouldn't be surprised if Marner only has 65, 70 points this year, just because he's not playing with a shoot-first center anymore. So much of, and look, it's not a knock to say you pass the puck to a great player, they score the goals. That's kind of the idea of a facilitator. But he's not playing with Austin Matthews, who's going to score 55 or 60 goals. Would it be fun if Marner and Eichel kind of had a symbiotic relationship that bumped Eichel to a 50-goal guy because he got to play with Marner? It'd be pretty sick to see Jack Eichel be an elite goal scorer. But can you score enough? Because we know the defense is good enough. And we know Aiden Hill, even though he probably isn't a bell cow 50, 55 start guy, we know he can be good enough in the playoffs to win. So the proof is there. They have questions as far as the depth goes, but their defense gives them a very high floor. They're elite players, Eichel and Marner in particular. I'm very curious to see what Shea Theodore does with the full brunt of basically being the guy does. We'll see if they make that Rasmus Anderson trade happen, but this is a really, really good hockey team. And I was very optimistic. I picked Vegas to win the Stanley Cup last year. I thought their defense was going to be the secret sauce, but they couldn't score enough. We'll see if Mitch Marner is enough to score. We are going to take our second and final break of today's edition of Locked On NHL. When we come back, we're going to talk about a lot of teams that have made the conference final and even the Stanley Cup final, but only one of these teams has won recently. Thank you to everyone who is hanging out on this Thursday edition of Locked On NHL as we are breaking down the top 10 teams by odds via our friends over at FanDuel and what their biggest questions, their deficiencies, the devil's advocate argument against them is. Next up after Vegas comes the Carolina Hurricanes at plus 950, 9.5 to 1 to win the whole thing. Get to a Stanley Cup final and we can have a conversation. It's really that simple for me. Until I see it, I'm not going to believe it. This is like the Bills winning the Super Bowl. This is like the Aaron Rodgers Packers winning the Super Bowl. Until I see you do it, I'm going to be skeptical. And again, you could say that about Toronto. I'm going to say it about Edmonton when we get to Edmonton. I'm going to say it about Dallas when we get to Dallas. Until I see you in a Stanley Cup final and holding the trophy, I'm going to be skeptical of your ability to do it. We have 7 years of Rod Brind'Amour Carolina Hurricanes hockey. They are going to be a really good regular season team. They probably win the Metro Division. They get an easy first-round matchup, and then in the second round, they actually have to get some hair on their chest, and they play a team that's got real superstars, and their goaltending starts to crack. Their special teams that are really good in the regular season take a minor step back, and that's the difference. And the margins are very small, and yes, the Hurricanes have won a lot of playoff games under Rod Brind'Amour. Until I see them in a Stanley Cup final representing the Eastern Conference, I am going to be skeptical that this style of play and this roster construction will work. Look, I like Nick Ehlers a lot. I don't think he fits what they do stylistically. I think they will get really good hockey out of K'Andre Miller because of the leaps they've been able to get out of guys like Brady Shea in particular comes to mind. But until I see them do it, I'm not going to believe it.
It's not even about like the Bills playing the Super Bowl. It's just the Bills beating the Chiefs in any round of the playoffs, whether it's the AFC title game or the AFC divisional round where we had that crazy game. Nick, it's really kind of like that. So with Carolina, I think you hit the nail on the head for basically all of this. Another thing for me, who is stepping up and scoring the goals? Slavin, now you have Ehlers, etc. Who is going to answer the call against some of these big guns that you go up against? Every time they have played the Panthers in the playoffs, they have gotten smoked. Hell, Nick, just a couple years ago, they played the Rangers. The Rangers smoked them, and then the Rangers lost to the Panthers in the next round. So it's just a matter of, they can beat up on some teams in the playoffs that don't have the star power to match them. And Carolina doesn't even have that big a star power. But once they go up against franchise caliber dudes, it just doesn't end well. And a team with also better goaltending. And Carolina's goaltending, it cracks. And you can only do so much with cycle, point, shot, repeat so many times until a better team with better high-end players figures it out and then just completely shuts you down. So I want to see if Rod Brind'Amour can figure that out this year. Can he make changes to his system so it's not just the same thing, cycle, point, shot, repeat against some of these top teams that have franchise caliber dudes? So that's another thing. And then also, like you said, I got to see it. Get to a Stanley Cup final. Yeah, it's great. You can win a round or two, get to a conference final, but until
can you win a game in the conference final, by the way, Rod Brind'Amour?
Yes, until you can also beat a legit team in the conference final and get to a cup final, you're just going to be a team that can win a couple of rounds and then, get to the final four. And hey, getting to the final four of the playoffs is pretty awesome, but eventually you got to take that next step. So that's what I'll say about Carolina. Number 3 though, Nick, this is pretty simple. The Florida Panthers at plus 850, they've won the last 2 cups. This one's easy, man. Can they survive Sasha Barkov being out for the year and potentially the entire Stanley Cup playoffs? The timeline right now is 7 to 9 months. Nick, where does 7 months get you? April. So they got to figure that out. Obviously, there's the new rules with the LTIR and the salary cap in the playoffs. So they're going to have to make some decisions on that if he's ever going to be ready for the playoffs, but he's not going to play during the regular season. Can they survive without him during?
I know Matthew Tkachuk for a little while.
Tkachuk is out until close to the Olympics. Can they survive without those two? In my opinion, until Tkachuk comes back, I think they can survive. I think they're going to make the playoffs. I think you'd be a fool to not think that. So with me, again, but playoff-wise, Barkov does so much for them, not just defensively, but he drives the offense. He is the straw that stirs the drink for that entire Panthers team. How are you replacing that in the playoffs? That's still my biggest concern. And also, Nick, they've played a lot of hockey these last 3 years, man. Sooner or later, you're going to have to pay the piper and you're going to be gassed. So those are my 2 things for the Panthers.
The one thing I'll say in addition to Florida, you had mentioned the Miles and the Barkov absence. Eventually, one of the guys they bring in on their back end has to fail, right? They've done this 3 years in a row where they've just brought guys in to be the 5th or 6th defenseman, and it's worked out really well. In the case of Alek Larson, it got him a medium-term contract from the Maple Leafs. And then I would point to Sergei Bobrovsky's regular season and playoff numbers the last 2 years. They're not great, Like, Bob is a decent goalie. I'd feel pretty good if I had him, but I am a little skeptical of him at this point. Last year of a contract very well could be Bob's last season in the NHL. If he decides to hang it up after this, nobody would begrudge him. He's assuredly a Hall of Famer with the 2 cups, the 2 Vezinas, but I think there's a world where Bob takes maybe a small step back, and in conjunction with some of the other problems they have up front, it could be a little bumpier, I would say, than maybe a lot of people think. That brings us to Dallas, who I feel like I've picked to win the Stanley Cup the last 4 years. They check in at 8.5 to 1, same odds as Florida and the number 1 team, Edmonton. For Dallas, it's exactly what I said about Carolina. Can you win? Can you get there? Dallas got to the Stanley Cup final in 2020 with their 3rd string goalie, Anton Hudobin, a bunch of really old dudes, and they lost in 6 games to Tampa Bay. I think Dallas, on paper, has the best roster in the NHL. In spite of the question marks they have on the right side of their defense, in spite of the question marks they might have in their bottom 6, we'll see if Jamie Benn plays, when he'll be able to play after that injury he suffered in the preseason. This is a really good hockey team. I other than the right side of their defense, I don't really see any weaknesses. And they have enough forward talent between Robertson and Rantanen and Hintz and Sagan and Duchesne that they should be able to outscore a lot of their problems. Thomas Harley, another year into his development as a high-end NHL defenseman. Hopefully a healthy season out of Miro Heiskanen, who missed a lot of time last year. Dallas has so much talent, but they need to win in these conference finals against either Edmonton or Vegas or Colorado. And they were a Rantanen hat trick in the 3rd period away from going out in the 1st round last year. So I think the Dallas team of last year and 2 years ago was probably a little bit better, a little bit more secure. But this team can win the Stanley Cup. I think this team has a very good chance to win it.
They can get through the Central, I think, again this year, but how will you do when you go up against the winner of the Pacific bracket? And it's probably going to be one of Vegas or Edmonton again. I would lean towards Vegas right now. So that's the biggest thing. Like, I'm just not sure that they're equipped to going to that final just because, they've really struggled against the Oilers these last couple of years. Yeah, I know, Nick, they beat Vegas in that crazy coin flip of a series just a couple of years ago. That was probably the best series of the 1st round, in my opinion. But now with how much improved Vegas is, if I had to pick a winner from the West right now, I probably would go Vegas, in my opinion, with Dallas right behind them. But also, how does the new head coach do? Glenn Gulletson, how does he do? So this is his 1st year on the job. They let go of Pete DeBoer, which I don't have a problem with. I think he kind of wears out his welcome after several seasons with a team where you're just not getting the results. And also he had some choice words for some of his players at the end of that series, which did not go over very well. So again, can they finally break through in the conference final? And also, how will that new coach do? And then finally, the Edmonton Oilers lead this with plus 800 odds to win the Stanley Cup. With Edmonton, Nick, I think it's pretty simple. If you get to a final, can you finally slay the Dragon this year, especially if you play the Panthers again, which, TBD. But also, they've played a ton of hockey these last few years. You've gone to back-to-back finals. Can you get to a 3rd straight final? Also, the goaltending, that's going to continue to be a question mark, Nick. I'm sorry.
Connor Ingram's not moving you?
No, he's not. I think they got to go out there and get a proven starter. And sorry, Cal Pickard and Stuart Skinner aren't moving me again either. It's crazy that they're running that tandem back as well. I get getting Ingram and I want him to succeed, but I'm still not sure those 3 goalies are really going to move me in a best of 7 against some of these top teams in the Western Conference. I like some of the moves they made. I like getting Mangiapane from the Capitals, by the way. I hope Savoy has also a really good year. I want to see, Nick, is Isaac Howard going to be on this team to start the year? That's going to be also something that's going to be curious to follow as well. So I like some of these younger pieces, but when push comes to shove, are you going to get the goaltending and are you going to defend? That's going to be the big things for me. So, and then also you have the Connor McDavid contract situation hanging over your head. So those are some of my concerns with the Oilers.
Okay, I will be quick here because we're up against it. This is the least talented Oilers team in 2 years. It's crazy to me their price as the Stanley Cup betting favorite with the roster they're going to put out there on opening night. You won't have Zach Hyman till at least the 1st week of November, if not longer than that. you are looking at a top six that's going to feature Trent Frederick and Andrew Mangiapane and maybe Kasperi Kapanen. This forward group leaves a lot to be desired as far as scoring at 5-on-5. Their power play took a step back last year, went from 5th to 11th. Their defense should be better. On paper, this defense is probably the best they've had to start a season in several years. I think as long as Ekholm doesn't look terrible the way he did in the conference final or the Stanley Cup final, I think the defense and the power play will be enough to keep them in the conversation. But ultimately, this is a team that probably needs another top six forward. And like you said, they probably need a real starting goalie. And I read a really glowing endorsement of Connor Ingram today in The Athletic, but this is a guy who has 100 career NHL starts. He's 28 years old. He's been a bell cow starter one time. I don't think Connor Ingram is going to push Stuart Skinner for the starter's job. He might be able to jump Calvin Pickard in the pecking order, but the Oilers have a lot of questions. Real quick, out of these 10 teams, I think if I had to pick somebody, I'd probably bet Vegas at 9.5 to 1. I think Vegas has a really good team. I think they have the coach they have a coach good enough to get them there. He's done it already. And I think it'd be really funny if Mitch Marner went to Vegas and they won the Cup the first year he was there.
I mean, buddy, thoughts and prayers to everyone in the city of Toronto if Mitch Marner wins a Cup this year and they just see him skating around and all that stuff. So, again, inject that into my veins, by the way. Also, if we somehow got – this would be great theater, but I don't know.
But if we got Edmonton, Florida 3?
No. Vegas, Toronto in the final, and Mitch Marner wins the Stanley Cup, and he skates around on the Toronto ice. Come on, man. That's total villain.
Gary scriptwriters aren't that good. This isn't the NFL. Goodell would have had that signed, sealed, and delivered in August as the plot line for this year. Unfortunately, Gary scriptwriters aren't that good. But that will do it for today's edition of Locked On NHL. Thank you so much to everybody who made Locked On NHL their first listen of the day. Locked On NHL is a part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we've got your team covered every day. Be sure to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, give the show a 5-star review. If you're watching over on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Join the conversation down in the comments. Hunter and I will talk to you guys next week when there is real NHL hockey to talk about. We'll see you guys then.